A nameplate on a polished mahogany table reads, Mr. Davenport. Seated before it is a man whose suit costs more than the car you drive. Theron Davenport, a tech mogul who treats billion-dollar acquisitions like a game of chess, is about to make his final move. But then, a ghost from his past walks up to his table, holding a notepad and wearing a stained apron. He looks up, his perfectly rehearsed power play forgotten. The woman, her face etched with a fatigue that years of struggle carve into a person, is Elowen Price, the most brilliant mind he ever knew in college, and she's here to ask him if he wants sparkling or still water. What happened to her? The answer is a dark, tangled secret that will threaten to unravel his entire empire. The air in Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. For Theron Davenport, it was the smell of victory. Across the table, Robert Henderson, the aging CEO of Innovate Dynamics, was sweating, not just from the ambient warmth of the private dining room, but from the surgical precision with which Theron had just dissected his company's valuation. The user acquisition cost is optimistic, Robert, Theron said, his voice a low, calm baritone that belied the predator lurking beneath. He swirled the deep crimson wine in his glass, a 2005 Chateau Margaux that cost more per bottle than the monthly rent on his first apartment. The Q3 projections hinge entirely on the successful rollout of Project Chimera, which, as my team has noted, is still heavily in beta. Theron was 34, but he moved with the gravitational pull of a man twice his age. His success was the stuff of legend in Silicon Valley, a scholarship kid from a nowhere town who, alongside a dorm room partner, had built a data analytics empire, Quantum Leap, from scratch. He'd bought out his partner 5 years ago and had been on a relentless, acquisitive rampage ever since. He wasn't just buying companies, he was consuming them, absorbing their technology, their talent, and their market share into his ever-expanding monolith. Henderson dabbed his forehead with a linen napkin. It's a revolutionary piece of tech, Theron. The algorithm it's practically precognitive. It will change data-driven marketing forever. Practically doesn't justify an extra 200 million, Theron countered, his eyes holding Henderson's. This was the final push, the moment where the prey either buckled or bolted. Theron was betting on the buckle. It was then that she approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I take your appetizer order, or would you like another moment?" The voice was professional, quiet, but it snagged on a thread of memory deep within Theron's mind. He looked up from Henderson's rapidly collapsing face, his attention shifting, and the world tilted on its axis. She was older, of course. They all were. But the woman standing there was a faded photograph of the person he remembered. Her chestnut hair, once a wild mane she was perpetually tucking behind her ear, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. Her eyes, which had once sparkled with fierce intelligence and a wicked sense of humor, were clouded with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. There were faint lines around them, not from laughter, but from worry. Her name tag, pinned crookedly to a cheap, black polyester apron, read Elowen. Elowen Price. The name echoed in the silent chambers of his memory. Elowen Price, the undisputed genius of their university's computer science department. The girl who could code circles around the professors, who debated philosophy with the arts majors, who had a full scholarship to a top-tier law school waiting for her after graduation. The girl who had been his friend, his partner in late-night study sessions, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared, burning ambition to escape their humble beginnings. She hadn't recognized him. Or more likely, she was pretending not to. Her gaze was fixed somewhere over their heads, a classic Waitress trick to maintain professional distance and avoid unwanted conversation. Theron felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The thrill of the corporate hunt vanished, replaced by a disorienting blend of shock, confusion, and a sharp, unfamiliar pang of something. Guilt? Pity? He wasn't sure. "We'll need a moment," Theron said, his voice strained. "Of course, sir." She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and turned to leave. "Wait," Theron said, the word escaping him before he could stop it. She paused, her back still to him. He could see the tension in her shoulders. She turned back slowly, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. "Yes, sir?" The "sir" was like a slap. This was Elowen, the woman who once called him E-Train because of his single-minded focus, the woman he'd argued with for hours about the ethics of artificial intelligence. "Elowen?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Elowen Price." For a fleeting second, the mask cracked. A flicker of something, panic, shame, recognition, flashed in her eyes before it was ruthlessly suppressed. Her jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, sir. You must have me confused with someone else." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The denial was so weak, so transparent, it was more painful than an admission would have been. Theron leaned forward slightly. "No, I don't. It's me. Theron Davenport. From Northgate University." Her eyes darted to Robert Henderson, then back to Theron. The pretense was costing her. He could see the tremor in her hand as she clutched her small notepad. "I'm afraid I don't remember. It was a long time ago. Now, if you'll excuse me, my manager is—" "We were friends, Elowen," Theron pressed, a strange urgency gripping him. The multimillion-dollar deal sitting opposite him had become wallpaper. "We had Professor Albright's data structures class together. You helped me pass. You said my code was brutishly effective but lacked elegance." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, a painful, fleeting thing. She remembered. The mask was gone, replaced by a raw, devastating vulnerability. I have to get back to work." She turned and fled, disappearing through the swinging doors to the kitchen. The doors flapped shut, leaving Theron staring at the empty space where she had stood. "Friend of yours?" Robert Henderson asked, seizing the opportunity to change the subject. Theron didn't answer. He was replaying the last decade in his head. After graduation, he'd moved to California, diving headfirst into the tech bubble. He'd heard through the grapevine that Elowen had gone to law school, just as planned. He'd pictured her in a corner office of some prestigious law firm, arguing cases before the Supreme Court, or maybe even starting her own tech law consultancy. He had never, in his wildest, most surreal nightmares, pictured her here, in this uniform, looking like this, broken. What in God's name had happened? A person doesn't just fall from that trajectory to this without a cataclysmic event. A failed marriage, a family crisis, addiction. His mind raced through the dark possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Theron went through the motions, his mind a million miles away. He agreed to Henderson's slightly revised terms, not out of generosity, but out of sheer distraction. He barely tasted the food, signed the preliminary agreement on autopilot, and shook Henderson's hand without registering the man's profound relief. All he could think about was Elowen. When the bill came, delivered by a different, younger waiter, Theron placed his black credit card into the leather folder. He took out his pen, signed the slip, and then paused. He scribbled his personal cell number on the back of the receipt. On the tip line, he wrote in $5,000. It was a crude, clumsy gesture, and he knew it. It felt like an insult, throwing money at a problem he didn't understand. but it was the only way he could think of to get her attention, to force a connection, to say, "I see you. Talk to me." He left the restaurant and stood on the cool, dark street, the city lights of his new hometown glittering around him. For the first time in years, the titan of industry felt small, powerless, and utterly lost. He looked back at the warm glow of Aria, at the swinging kitchen doors. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. He had just conquered another company, another corner of the market. But all he could think about was the friend he had lost and the ghost he had just found. He had to know her story. He had to understand. And a dark, unsettling feeling began to creep in, that understanding the fall of Elowen Price would force him to look at the uncomfortable truths of his own rise. The $5,000 sat on Elowen Price's rickety kitchen table like a judgment. It was more money than she had in her bank account, more than her rent for the next 3 months combined. It was a lifeline, and it was an insult, a monument to the chasm that had opened up between her life and Theron's. She had stared at the receipt for a full 10 minutes in the restaurant staff room, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fold it. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named George, had snatched it from her, his eyes bugging out. "Did you save this guy's life, Price, or are you sleeping with him?" The casual cruelty of the question had been enough to snap her out of her stupor. She'd snatched it back, stuffed it in her pocket, and finished her shift in a daze, her carefully constructed walls crumbling with every plate she cleared. Seeing Theron, it wasn't like seeing an old acquaintance. It was like being confronted by a version of herself that had died long ago. The ambitious, brilliant, fearless woman who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with him was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell who measured her life in double shifts and aching feet. Now, in her cramped, one-bedroom apartment above a noisy laundromat, the city's hum a constant, grating companion, she stared at his number. Theron Davenport. The name sounded foreign, powerful. The boy she knew was just Theron. Intense, driven, a little socially awkward, but with a good heart. They had bonded over being the two smartest, poorest kids in a program full of legacies and trust fund babies. They were supposed to conquer the world together on parallel tracks. He'd done it. And she was serving him lobster bisque. Her pride, the last tattered remnant of her old self, screamed at her to rip up the receipt and throw the money back in his face. How dare he? How dare he walk back into her life, draped in success, and offer her charity? A tip, as if their friendship, their shared history, could be quantified and settled like a restaurant bill. But desperation was a more powerful voice. Her car's transmission was shot. Her landlord was making noises about the rent being late again. A dull, throbbing ache in her back tooth was a constant reminder of a dental bill she couldn't afford to incur. The $5,000 wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. It was air. With a shaking hand, she picked up her cheap, cracked-screen smartphone and typed out a text. Her fingers hovered over the screen, deleting and rewriting the message a dozen times. Thank you for the generous tip. It wasn't necessary. Too cold. It was a shock seeing you tonight. Too vulnerable. Theron, it's Elowen. We need to talk. Too demanding. Finally, she settled on something simple, something that gave away nothing. It's Elowen Price. Thank you. She hit send before she could lose her nerve. An immediate reply buzzed back, so fast it made her jump. I know. Are you free to talk, or meet? Coffee? Tomorrow? The barrage of questions felt like him. The old Theron, direct, efficient, no time wasted. She felt a wave of dizziness. What would they even talk about? The weather? The good old days? Was she supposed to sit there and listen to him recount his triumphs, while she choked down her failure. "Coffee is fine," she typed back. "Where and when? The Daily Grind on West 12th. 10 a.m. My treat." The last two words were another tiny sting, another reminder of the new dynamic between them. My treat. Of course it was. The next morning, Elowen spent an hour agonizing over what to wear, a ritual she hadn't performed in years. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of her work uniform and a collection of faded jeans and worn-out sweaters. She settled on her one good outfit, a simple pair of black trousers and a charcoal grey cashmere sweater she'd bought on a deep discount years ago, a relic from a life where such small luxuries were possible. She pulled her hair back, not in a work bun, but in a loose, low ponytail, and applied a touch of makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. It was a futile effort. She looked like what she was, a tired waitress trying to look like she wasn't. The Daily Grind was a neutral space, a hipster-approved cafe with exposed brick and the overwhelming aroma of artisanal roasted beans. Theron was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. He wasn't wearing a power suit today, but a simple, well-fitted Henley and dark jeans. Without the armor of corporate wealth, he looked more like the boy she remembered. The sight eased a fraction of the tension in her shoulders. He stood up as she approached. "Elowen, thanks for coming." "Theron," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "You didn't have to do that. Last night. The tip." "Forget about that," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I was just surprised. Can I get you something?" She ordered a black coffee, he a green tea. For a few moments, they sat in an awkward silence, the ghosts of their shared past filling the space between them. "So," Theron began, his gaze direct, searching. "It's been a long time. I heard you went to Stanford Law." Here it was, the Inquisition. Elowen took a deep breath, preparing the sanitized, Cliff's Notes version of her tragedy, the one she told to nosy relatives and old acquaintances she bumped into at the grocery store, the version that preserved a sliver of her dignity. "I did," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "For a while. I finished my first year." "What happened?" he asked gently. "Life," she said with a shrug that she hoped looked casual. "My mum got sick. Pancreatic cancer. It was aggressive. I moved back home to be with her. The treatments, the bills, everything was a lot. I took a semester off, which turned into a year. After she passed away, the debt was overwhelming. Law school didn't seem like a possibility anymore, so I started working. And here we are." She delivered the monologue flatly, an actress reciting lines she had long since memorized. It was all true, but it was a curated truth. It omitted the darkest, most shameful parts of the story. Theron listened, his expression unreadable. He wasn't offering platitudes or empty condolences, for which she was grateful. He just nodded slowly, processing the information. "I'm sorry about your mum, Elowen." "I really am," he said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "But you were the most brilliant person in our entire class. There are programs, scholarships for situations like yours. You could have gone back." "It's not that simple, Theron," she said, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "When you're drowning, you don't have the luxury of looking for a better lifeboat. You just grab whatever's floating by." He fell silent again, but she could see the gears turning in his head. The old Theron, the problem solver, the data analyst. He was analyzing her, looking for the inconsistencies in her story, the missing data points. It made her deeply uncomfortable. "What about Blake?" Theron asked suddenly. The name hit her like a physical blow. Her cup clattered against the saucer as she flinched. Blake Anderson, the handsome, charming, ambitious third member of their little university trio. Her ex-boyfriend, the biggest mistake of her life. "What about him?" she asked, her voice tight. "I just remember you two were a thing. Weren't you talking about starting a business together? Some kind of predictive analytics for legal cases?" Elowen's blood ran cold. Blake was the part of the story she never told, the gaping, festering wound she kept hidden from the world. "That was just college talk," she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It never went anywhere." Theron's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew she was lying. He didn't push, but he filed the information away. She could see it. The rest of the conversation was stilted and superficial. He told her a bit about his company, toning down the scale of his success. But it was impossible to hide. He talked about the pressures, the travel, the isolation at the top. It was a half-hearted attempt to find common ground, but the ground between them was a canyon. He offered her a job. Not out of pity, he claimed, but because he knew what she was capable of. A research position at Quantum Leap, a 6-figure salary, a new life. It was everything she should have wanted. But the offer was tainted by the $5,000 tip, by the pity she saw in his eyes, by the shame of her own circumstances. And more than that, there was a dark, tangled knot of history with Blake that she couldn't explain, a history that made her feel unworthy and fraudulent. "I can't," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Thank you, Theron. It's an incredible offer. But I can't." "Why not?" he asked, clearly baffled. I have things here. I need to get back on my own 2 feet, my own way." It was a weak, prideful excuse, and they both knew it. He didn't argue. He just gave her a long, searching look. "The offer stands, Elowen. Any time. And if you need anything, and I mean anything, not just money, you have my number." She left the cafe feeling worse than before. She had his pity, his charity, and a job offer she was too proud and too broken to accept. She had protected her secret, but the effort had cost her dearly. Theron watched her walk away, a small, solitary figure, disappearing into the anonymous city crowd. Her story didn't add up. The grief and the debt from her mother's illness were tragic, but they weren't enough to shatter someone like Elowen Price. She was a fighter. She would have found a way back. Something else had broken her. Something she wasn't telling him. And her reaction to Blake Anderson's name, that wasn't just an old college memory. That was a raw nerve. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who commanded a global information network. If Elowen wouldn't tell him the whole story, he would find it out for himself. He made a call to his head of security, a former Mossad agent named David Ben-Zion, whose skills went far beyond corporate cybersecurity. "David," Theron said, his voice low and hard, "I have a personal project for you. I want you to run a deep background check on a woman named Elowen Price. And while you're at it, find out everything you can about a man named Blake Anderson. I have a feeling their paths crossed after college. I want to know where, when, and what happened." As he ended the call, Theron looked at the details of the Innovate Dynamics acquisition on his tablet. He scrolled through the executive leadership bios. And there it was. His blood turned to ice. Chief Operating Officer, Blake Anderson. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered on the table, but a terrifying picture was beginning to form. Elowen's fall from grace wasn't an accident, and her tormentor wasn't just in her past. He was in Theron's immediate future. The puzzle pieces Theron held were jagged and unsettling. On one side, Elowen, brilliant, broken, and hiding a deep trauma connected to a man from their past. On the other, Blake Anderson. That same man, now the COO of the company Theron, was days away from acquiring. Coincidence was a concept Theron didn't believe in. Not at this level. This was a collision course. His investigator, David, was ruthlessly efficient. Within 48 hours, the first report landed in Theron's encrypted inbox. It was a digital ghost story outlining the slow, painful demolition of Elowen Price's life. David confirmed the details about her mother's illness and the crushing medical debt. But then came the new information, the chapters Elowen had torn out of her story. After her mother's death, Elowen hadn't just been working dead-end jobs. For a period of 18 months, she had been the co-founder and chief technology officer of a registered LLC, Viridian Logic. The other co-founder and CEO, Blake Anderson. Their mission statement, pulled from an archived version of their defunct website, was to create a proprietary software that used predictive analytics to assist in legal discovery, potentially saving law firms millions. It was the idea they'd kicked around in college, the one Elowen had claimed went nowhere. It had gone somewhere, and it had crashed and burned spectacularly. Viridian Logic had been dissolved, leaving behind a trail of debt, most of it linked to Elowen's name. Blake Anderson, however, had landed on his feet with uncanny speed. Just 2 months after Viridian's collapse, he was hired by Innovate Dynamics, a mid-level tech firm. His rise there had been meteoric, culminating in his current position as COO. David's report noted something else. The flagship product that had propelled Innovate Dynamics to its current valuation, the product known as Project Chimera, was an AI-driven predictive analytics engine. Its core function sounded eerily similar to the mission statement of Viridian Logic. Theron felt a cold, hard anger crystallize in his gut. This wasn't just a failed startup. This was a heist. He arranged a pre-acquisition dinner with Blake, citing the need to build a rapport with the incoming executive team. He chose a different restaurant, a sleek, modern place with glass walls and a commanding view of the city skyline. He needed to see the man for himself, to look him in the eye and take his measure. Blake Anderson hadn't changed much. He still had the same easy smile, the same confident charm that had always made people, especially women, trust him instantly. He was handsome in a way that seemed calculated, his suit perfect, his handshake firm, his gaze direct. He was the picture of success. They made small talk for the first 20 minutes, discussing market trends and the synergistic potential of the merger. Blake was smooth, articulate, and impressive. He knew all the right buzzwords. Theron played his part, nodding, asking insightful questions, letting Blake believe he was winning him over. Then, as the waiter cleared their main course plates, Theron went in. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair with a casual air, "I ran into an old friend from Northgate the other day. I was surprised. Elowen Price." He watched Blake's face like a hawk. For a split second, less than a heartbeat, Blake's smile faltered. A flicker of something cold and sharp passed through his eyes before being replaced by a look of practiced, pitying sadness. "Oh, Elowen," Blake said, shaking his head slowly. "Yeah, a real shame what happened to her. She was brilliant, you know. Absolutely brilliant." "That's what I remember," Theron said, keeping his tone neutral. "What did happen? I heard her mother was sick." "That was part of it for sure," Blake said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "But it was more than that. The pressure, it got to her. We tried to start a business together, you know. Viridian Logic. It was her idea, mostly, and it was revolutionary, but she couldn't handle it." Theron felt his hand clench into a fist under the table. Couldn't handle what? The work? The stress, the setbacks. Every little bug in the code, every potential investor who said no, she took it as a personal failure. After her mum died, she just unraveled, Blake continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. She became erratic, paranoid, accused me of trying to steal her work. It got ugly. In the end, I had to walk away for my own sanity. The whole thing fell apart. It broke my heart to see her like that. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. In this version of the story, Blake was the victim, the long-suffering partner who had tried to help his brilliant but unstable friend, only to be dragged down with her. He had painted Elowen as a tragic, mentally fragile figure, preemptively discrediting anything she might say about him. "That's a tough situation," Theron said, his voice dangerously calm. "And this Project Chimera you're so proud of at Innovate Dynamics, is it based on similar principles to your old project?" Blake didn't flinch. "In a manner of speaking, I took the lessons learned from that failure, the core concepts, and built something better, more robust, on a stable foundation this time." He was admitting it, Theron realized with a jolt. He was admitting to taking the intellectual property, but he'd created a narrative that justified it. It was Elowen's idea, but she was too unstable to execute it, so he had nobly carried the torch forward. It was a story that, without any other evidence, was entirely believable. Theron now had the what. He still needed the how. His next call was to David. "I need more," he said, pacing his penthouse apartment, the city lights a blur below. "He's claiming she was unstable. I need proof of his actions. Financial records, emails, server logs from Viridian Logic. I want to see the money trail. I want to see their correspondence. Dig. I don't care what it costs." 3 days later, David delivered the smoking gun. He had managed to recover a ghost image of Viridian Logic's cloud server from a backup that was scheduled for permanent deletion in a week. It was a digital time capsule of the company's death. The emails were damning. Theron read through months of correspondence, his anger growing with every message. He saw Blake systematically gaslighting Elowen. He would praise her work in one email, then subtly criticize her in another, seesaing a potential investor. He would create artificial deadlines she couldn't possibly meet, then express disappointment when she failed. He preyed on her grief, telling her to take time off for her mother, while simultaneously telling their contacts that she was becoming unreliable. The financial records were even worse. Blake had set up a shell consulting firm, registered in Delaware under his cousin's name. He had been billing Viridian Logic exorbitant consulting fees for months, bleeding the startup dry from the inside. The money went from Viridian's account to the shell company, and then directly into Blake's personal offshore account. He had bankrupted their company on purpose, all while making Elowen believe it was her fault. The final piece was the code itself. Theron, who still coded for fun, spent a whole night analyzing the early builds of the Viridian software from the server backup and comparing them to the leaked specs of Project Chimera. It was the same architecture, the same unique, elegant, innovative core logic, the logic that had Elowen's fingerprints all over it. Blake had stolen her genius, her company, her reputation, and her future. Theron closed his laptop, a feeling of cold fury settling over him. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. This was the systematic destruction of a human being. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't just go to Elowen with this. The information would vindicate her, yes, but it would also devastate her. To see the calculated nature of the betrayal laid out in black and white, it could break her all over again. And going to the authorities would be a long, messy process. Blake would hire expensive lawyers and try to drag Elowen's name, her grief, and her mental state through the mud. No, the punishment had to fit the crime. Blake had engineered a professional and personal ruin. He needed to suffer the same. And the stage for that reckoning was already set. The final acquisition meeting in the Quantum Leap boardroom. But he couldn't do it alone. This had to be Elowen's victory. He had opened the door and shone a light on the truth. She had to be the one to walk through it. He called her. "Elowen, it's Theron. Can we meet? It's important. It's about Viridian logic." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know about that?" "I'll explain everything," he said. "Meet me at my office, not the cafe. My office. It's time you stopped seeing yourself as a waitress and started remembering who you really are." Elowen felt the city move past the tinted windows of the black sedan like a silent film, a world she had long observed but never felt a part of. The car, a Maybach that smelled of new leather and quiet power, was a vessel from another reality. It carried her towards the Quantum Leap Tower, a gleaming spear of glass and steel that pierced the sky. And with every block, the phantom limb of her old ambition ached. This was the life she had once envisioned, not the opulence, but the purpose, the feeling of moving toward a summit, not just struggling to keep her head above water. For years she had crushed that part of herself into dust, a necessary survival mechanism. Now it was stirring. The lobby was less a room and more an ecosystem. It was hushed, yet thrummed with a low-frequency energy. Men and women with sharp suits and sharper eyes glided across the polished marble, their movements economical and confident. No one rushed, but no one was idle. It was the physical embodiment of efficiency, a world away from the clatter and chaos of the restaurant kitchen. Elowen clutched the strap of her worn handbag, the worn leather a stark contrast to the sleek perfection around her. She felt like a translation error, a sentence from a different book accidentally inserted into this one. A silent private elevator whisked her to the top floor. The doors opened directly into Theron's office, and the view struck her with physical force. The city sprawled beneath her, a breathtaking, intricate circuit board of lights and lives. It was a conqueror's view. Theron wasn't behind his desk, a vast, uncluttered expanse of dark wood, but was standing by the windows, a silhouette against the afternoon sun. He turned as she entered, and the look on his face wasn't one of triumph or pity. It was somber, heavy with the gravity of what he was about to do. He was about to hand her a bomb, knowing full well it would obliterate the foundations of her world, even if those foundations were built on ruins. "Thank you for coming, Elowen," he said, his voice low. He gestured not to the imposing desk, but to a more intimate seating area, with 2 deep leather armchairs and a low glass table. It was a deliberate choice, an attempt to soften the blow. She sat on the very edge of the chair, unable to relax into its plush depths. Her body was a coiled spring of anxiety. "You said it was about Viridian," she said, her voice a strained whisper, the name of her failed company feeling like a curse on her lips. "It is," Theron said, sitting opposite her. He didn't prevaricate. He simply placed a slim, elegant tablet on the table between them. "I'm in the final stages of acquiring a company called Innovate Dynamics. As it turns out, their chief operating officer is Blake Anderson." Elowen flinched as if he'd struck her. The name was a key that unlocked a dungeon in her mind, and for a moment, the fears and insecurities she'd kept chained there swirled around her. But she said nothing, her hands gripping each other in her lap so tightly her knuckles went white. "I saw you at the restaurant, Elowen," he continued, his gaze steady and kind. "And afterwards your story. It didn't feel complete. It felt like a summary, not the novel. I know you. I know how you fight. The woman I know wouldn't have been broken by debt and grief alone. Something else had to have happened. He pushed the tablet an inch closer to her. So I looked into it. I looked into him. And I am so sorry for what I found. He tapped the screen, and it lit up. He began not with financials, but with her own words, an archived mission statement for Viridian logic she had written years ago, full of hope and fiery intelligence. Then he pulled up a slide of Project Chimera's mission statement. The language was different, sanitized with corporate jargon, but the soul of the idea was identical. Her soul. He told everyone it was his innovation, Theron said softly, built on the lessons learned from a failed venture with a brilliant but unstable partner. Elowen felt the air leave her lungs, the narrative he had sold to the world, the one she had half believed herself. Then Theron brought up the emails. He didn't just summarize them. He showed her a specific thread. One email from Blake, dated 6 weeks after her mother's funeral. Elowen, you need to take this time. Don't worry about the investors. Don't worry about the code. I'll handle everything. Your healing is what's most important. I've got you. The memory of that message, of the relief she had felt, was still vivid. Then Theron swiped the screen. Side by side with that email, he displayed a bank statement from the same day. A transfer of $50,000 from Viridian Logic's operating account to a shell entity called Anderson Strategic Solutions. A choked, strangled sound escaped Elowen's throat. It was the sound of a truth she had refused to see, finally piercing through layers of denial. He continued, relentless not out of cruelty, but necessity. He showed her the web of lies, emails to potential partners mentioning her erratic behavior, her unreliability, all while he praised her to her face. He showed her the flow of money, a steady, methodical bleeding of their company's lifeblood into his own accounts. He showed her the final, damning evidence, a forensic comparison of her original Viridian algorithm and Blake's Project Chimera code. Her elegant, unique architecture was there, unmistakable, like a signature woven into every line. He hadn't just stolen her idea. He had stolen the work of her hands and the product of her mind. Elowen stared at the screen, the world narrowing to the cold light of the tablet. The story it told was so much uglier than the one she'd been telling herself. Her version was a tragedy of circumstance. This was a meticulous, cold-blooded execution. The tears started then, not the loud, cathartic sobs of grief, but silent, hot tears that tracked down her face, each one a testament to a specific lie she had believed. She wept for the woman who thought she was a failure, for the shame she had carried like a shroud, for the years she had lost, mourning a past that had been murdered, not just lost. Theron didn't speak. He simply pushed a box of tissues onto the table and waited, giving her the dignity of her grief. He was a silent sentinel, guarding the space she needed to let one reality die so another could be born. And then the tears stopped. The well of sorrow ran dry, and in its place, something else began to bubble up from the depths. It was hot and sharp, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Pure, unadulterated rage. It burned away the fog of shame, the haze of exhaustion. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, the focus in her eyes sharpened to a lethal point. The old Elowen, the one who took no prisoners in a debate and dismantled faulty logic with glee, was clawing her way back to the surface. "He told me I was losing it," she whispered, her voice raw and dangerous. "He said my grief was making me paranoid, making me see things that weren't there. He used my mother's death against me. She looked up from the tablet, her eyes locking with Theron's. They were no longer the haunted eyes of a waitress. They were the eyes of a strategist. He would hold my hand in our apartment, tell me it was okay, that we would get through it, that he would handle the pressure while I healed. And all along, she glanced back at the damning financials. All along, he was gutting our company and salting the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. I know, Theron said, his voice quiet but firm. Her gaze was now blazing with cold fire. What do you want to do about it? Theron leaned forward, his expression mirroring her intensity. What do we want to do about it? He corrected, empowering her with a single word. I've spoken to my lawyers. We can go to the district attorney. We have more than enough for a criminal case for wire fraud and a massive civil suit for intellectual property theft. We would win. He paused, letting the alternative sink in. But it will be a war. It will be long, public, and ugly. Blake will fight dirty. His lawyers will try to exhume your mother's memory, your grief, your mental state at the time. They will try to put you on trial. Elowen shook her head, a sharp, definitive motion. No, that's not good enough. A lawsuit is about damages, about money. This was never just about money. He tried to erase me. He built his career on my ashes and tried to convince me I'd lit the match myself. I don't want to sue him in a courtroom years from now. I want to dismantle him in the arena he chose. I want to correct the record, publicly. Her mind, dormant for so long, was now firing on all cylinders. The legal training, the technological brilliance, it all came rushing back. I want to expose him in front of the very people he conned, the ones who are about to hand him the prize for his crime. A slow, deeply impressed smile spread across Theron's face. He was witnessing a resurrection. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. The final signing for the acquisition is on Friday at 10 a.m. in my boardroom. Blake will be there, alongside Robert Henderson and the rest of their board. They believe they're on the verge of the biggest payday of their lives. A dangerous gleam lit Elowen's eyes. The boardroom, she repeated, the words tasting of victory. She looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of the tablet. The tired waitress was gone. I'll need a decent suit, she said, her voice now crisp and commanding. And I'll need access to your presentation software, your best data visualization tech, and your legal team for a final review. He wrote a fiction about me. I'm going to present them with the non-fiction. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Theron cleared a strategy room for her, a glass-walled enclosure they dubbed the War Room. He assigned her 2 of his sharpest paralegals and a data visualization expert who could make spreadsheets sing. Elowen worked with a furious, focused energy she hadn't felt since college. She was no longer just a victim of a crime. She was the lead prosecutor in the case against Blake Anderson. She dissected the evidence, arranged it into a narrative, and built a presentation that was equal parts legal indictment, technological masterclass, and public execution. It was a weapon, and she spent every waking moment sharpening it to a razor's edge. Friday morning. The main boardroom at Quantum Leap was a study in restrained power. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and the quiet hum of a 9-figure deal about to close. On one side of the massive granite table sat Robert Henderson and his board, their faces alight with anticipation. Among them, Blake Anderson was the picture of a man at the peak of his powers, immaculate in a tailored Italian suit, laughing quietly with Henderson, radiating a smug confidence that set Elowen's teeth on edge as she watched from a monitor in the adjoining strategy room. Theron, seated opposite them, was a mask of cool neutrality. He let the lawyers drone on, Let the pages be turned, building the tension in the room. Finally, just as Henderson reached for a pen, Theron held up a hand. The small gesture commanded immediate silence. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the expectant atmosphere. "Before we apply ink to paper, my internal audit team has flagged one final, critical area of concern in our due diligence. It pertains to the provenance of the intellectual property of your core asset, Project Chimera." A ripple of confusion went through the Innovate Dynamics side of the table. Blake's smile tightened. "A concern?" Henderson asked, his tone laced with impatience. "Theron, this is highly irregular. We passed your due diligence with flying colors weeks ago." "Consider this the final check," Theron replied smoothly, his eyes betraying nothing. "I believe in being pathologically thorough. To that end, we've brought in an independent consultant, a leading specialist in this particular type of predictive algorithm, to give her final assessment on the asset's integrity." He paused, then nodded to the grand boardroom doors. "Please come in." The doors swung open, and Elowen Price walked in. The transformation was absolute. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white silk blouse beneath it. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional chignon. Her steps were measured and unshakable on the marble floor. She held a tablet in one hand, but she wasn't clutching it like a shield. She held it like a weapon. She looked every inch the powerful, high-priced consultant Theron had described. From across the room, Blake Anderson saw her. His confident smirk dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, sickly pallor. His mouth fell slightly open as his brain tried and failed to reconcile the woman he'd destroyed with the powerhouse striding towards him. He shot a panicked, desperate look at Theron, but Theron's face was stone. There was no escape. Elowen ignored him completely. Her focus was absolute. She walked to the head of the table, her presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. She coolly connected her tablet to the room's massive 8K display screen. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. Her voice, amplified slightly by the room's acoustics, was clear, calm, and resonant with an authority that had been stolen from her for years. "My name is Elowen Price. For the past 48 hours, at the request of Quantum Leap, I have been conducting a deep forensic audit of the source code, development history, and financial underpinnings of Project Chimera." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the stunned faces of the Innovate Dynamics board. "And I'm afraid I've found more than a few irregularities. I've found a ghost in the machine." With a tap on her screen, the presentation began. It was a masterwork of destruction. She started with the technology, displaying her original, elegant Viridian architecture on one side of the screen. Then, with a dramatic animation, she overlaid the code structure of Project Chimera. It snapped into place over her original work, like a key in a lock. A perfect match. A collective gasp went through the room. "As you can see," she said, her tone clinical, "Project Chimera isn't an innovation. It's a theft, repackaged with a new name." Then she pivoted to motive and method. She displayed the damning emails, the ones filled with his false sympathy and calculated lies. Then, with devastating effect, she put up the corresponding financial records, showing the flow of money out of their company on the very same days he was professing his support. The room was silent, save for Blake's ragged breathing. Finally, she turned her full attention to Blake, her gaze pinning him to his chair. "So, to summarize," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of absolute truth. "The 9-figure asset that forms the entire basis of this acquisition is, in fact, stolen intellectual property. It was stolen from a company that Mr. Anderson, your COO, deliberately and fraudulently bankrupted by embezzling its operating capital. She took a step closer, and it was stolen from me. The silence that followed was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Robert Henderson, his face a mottled canvas of horror and fury, stared at the screen, then at Blake. This is insane! Slander! Blake finally stammered, scrambling to his feet. His voice was shrill. She's an unstable, disgruntled ex-partner with a vendetta. She's lying. Theron finally spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. Are the bank records lying, Blake? Are the authenticated server logs lying? My forensic accounting team has independently verified every single piece of data Miss Price has presented. It is irrefutable. That was it. The final nail. Henderson erupted. Security! He bellowed, his fist slamming the table, rattling the expensive water glasses. Get him out of my sight. You're finished, Anderson. You're ruined. Get him out! Two imposing security guards, who had been waiting discreetly outside, entered the room. They flanked Blake, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure, pathetic terror. The Italian suit, the confident charm, it had all evaporated, revealing the hollow man beneath. As they escorted him out, a broken man being led from the scene of his own execution, his eyes met Elowen's for one last, fleeting moment. There was no hatred in her gaze, no vengeful glee. There was only the cool, distant finality of a chapter closed. She had not just beaten him, she had erased him. The deal, of course, was dead. An hour later, Elowen and Theron sat alone in the silent, cavernous boardroom. The unsigned contracts were still on the table, monuments to a fraud that had almost succeeded. Innovate Dynamics is finished, Theron said, gazing at the paperwork. Henderson just called. The board is in chaos. They're facing shareholder lawsuits, federal investigation. They'll be bankrupt within 6 months. A shame, Elowen said, a small, weary but deeply satisfied smile touching her lips. Not entirely, Theron countered, turning to her. The look in his eyes was one of profound respect. Their infrastructure is still sound. Their client list is solid. Their only worthless asset was the stolen tech and the man who ran the company into the ground. I'm going to let them bleed for a week, and then I'm going to make a new offer. Pennies on the dollar for the company's tangible assets. He leaned forward, his expression intense. You didn't just expose him in there, Elowen. You just delivered the single most compelling, ruthless, and brilliant presentation this boardroom has ever seen. A company is nothing without the right people. This new division I'm creating from these ashes will need a leader, someone who understands the technology better than anyone else on the planet, someone who can rebuild it, ethically, brilliantly, and lead it into the future. It's a president-level position. The salary is significant. The responsibility is immense. He was offering her a kingdom, built on the rubble of the life that had been stolen from her. This wasn't a handout. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was a job offer she had earned 10 times over, sealed with her performance in that very room. It was justice, reclamation, and a second chance, all rolled into one. Tears welled in Elowen's eyes for the second time that week, but these felt entirely different. They weren't tears of sorrow or shame, but of overwhelming, cleansing relief. The weight of years of failure, a failure that was never hers to begin with, was finally, truly gone. She looked at Theron, a bright, genuine smile spreading across her face, reaching her eyes for the first time in a decade. I think, she said, her voice thick with emotion, but steady and sure, that I know just the woman for the job. And so, Elowen Price's story isn't just about a millionaire saving his old friend. It's a story about reclamation. It reminds us that your circumstances don't define your worth, and that the brightest minds can be hidden in the most unexpected places. Theron gave her an opportunity, but Elowen, with her own brilliance and courage, seized her own justice. She walked into that boardroom and didn't just expose a thief. She reclaimed her past, her genius, and her future. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that it's never too late to rewrite your own narrative, to face down the ghosts of your past, and to remember the person you were always meant to be. If this story of resilience, friendship, and ultimate vindication moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more real-life stories that inspire and shock you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You never know whose story we'll tell next.